Well, there's been a lot of opinion polls. One suggests there is now a pretty healthy majority for independence in Scotland. The Labour Party over the whole of the UK is now really struggling, and Reform is the second party. In fact, they're pretty much running neck and neck with the Greens overall. And yet, bizarrely, after the Caerffili by-election victory by Plaid Cymru, who did we hear from across the airwaves? But Reform and Labour, not the victors themselves. Pretty par for the course. So we try to correct that. We also talk a little about another election you won't have heard much about, the presidential election in Ireland, where a left-wing Republican endorsed by Kneecap, who wants free public transport, housing as a human right, and support for the Irish language, plus Palestine, well, she won. And what does that mean? We look also at problems in Scotland, violence in the classroom. Those statistics are appalling. But what do they speak of at a deeper level? That's all the kind of headlines for today's podcast. Let's get on with the show.
Well, hi folks, and welcome to this week's Leslie Riddoch podcast. It's been a big week, or as usual we say, nothing has happened, of course, Leslie, apart from the huge news from the Caerffili by-election, where Reform stomped home to... Sorry, no, I'm reading that from the BBC early news releases.
It's ridiculous. I'm still seeing stuff. I mean, fucking incredible nonsense, you know, from like a Reuters analysis and an EU kind of newsletter I get saying that Labour should actually be feeling buoyed by the fact that Reform can be beaten. That's the message, you know, that you could. I mean, it's extraordinary. But I mean, I've got to say, first of all, there's been a lot of. In fact, I'd almost rehearsed all my different good mornings in all the different languages of the people who've been in touch. Nothing va, borida, and good morn, just for good measure, to stuck it in. But anyway,
gleva.
Right. So, yeah, there was a lovely email from David Thomas. Who just wanted to say he was buzzing. He's a Welsh listener, maybe not surprisingly with the name. And he says, thanks for shining a light on Wales. We often feel ignored and overlooked. He said, you guys know the feeling. Great to hear your enthusiasm about our politics, culture and language. And closes, Di Olach O'Gallan. I think that's right. Thanks. Anyway, thanks, David. And also, when I was talking about a great project that I mentioned, there was a link in it where people are being asked to nominate the stories in Welsh about places. And quite a few people got in touch to sort of say, we do that kind of thing in Ireland, in Scotland. I mean, just to be nitpicking, it's the story bit that I thought was lovely. Obviously, there's lots of sites in both Irish and Scottish, Gaelic and Gaelic, respectively, that do lots of stuff about place names. Anna Walker, otherwise Anna Ruach, got in touch to talk about a website that I'll put in the links there. Here we go again. Enuma Acha na Halba. That one, that has all sorts of Gaelic names, so you can click on place names to get their meaning in English. She had a lot of other lovely websites which are about story walks in the Cairngorms. Nature Scott's got Forgotten Woodlands and stories about that as well. There's part of the Kist o Riches, Tobar an Dulchas, which is a great resource for kids. And it's got loads of place names, but also lots of, you know, stories and meanings and so on. So that is from the Scots. From Marion Farrell in Ireland, when I went over to show the Denmark film there, Marion was part of the posse. that was some evening where I kind of turned up for a wee meal, and there was 7 cheery, shiny little faces going, "We've been listening to your podcast for 7 years." I was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing." Anyway, Marion was sort of delicately saying, "My goodness, perhaps we didn't really make you aware of how much there is in Northern Irish about Irish in Northern Ireland." So she's got various links to an all-Irish festival of culture, a short film about Irish in Belfast. The title says, "Don't just say it, do it." And there's a list of Irish medium nurseries. And of course, the fabulous tourist project, which I did a wee film about, Linda Irvine, who runs that. She is just an amazing woman. We never managed to get it together to edit it, but she's sort of saying that's an Irish language centre in Protestant East Belfast. So, of course, all of this is there as well. And the thing that I thought was really charming is that nobody got on their high horse and went, "How dare you go on about the Welsh? We've got
What
all this
about us?
riches here. What about us?" It was all a lot more. And that is interesting. And here's another thing, So thank you for the delicate way that you kind of wove that in, and we'll put all those links up there. And for everybody who wants to just spend a week basically just sinking into a beautiful Celtic not work cushion of language, stories, and everything else, knock yourselves out.
Absolutely. And
Back to Caerphilli.
do check out the Wales extra that we put up. I think sometimes people are just looking for the pod on a Tuesday and maybe miss these if they come out not actually as a sort of instead of. So yeah, check that out. It was very, very good. So Mr Caerphilli, Lindsay Whittle, who I had, I'm sure, came up and campaigned with us in Edinburgh during the 2014 referendum. One of the great Plaid contingent, romped home in Caerphilli, and this was a kind of opposite of our by-election. He was Mr Caerphilli. He had tried for that seat, a million times. He was known by everybody all over the place. He was a local councillor. He had great name recognition. People understood who he was, a bit like the Labour candidate in the recent by-election where Reform came second here.
Yeah, the Rutherglen one.
The Rutherglen.
Yeah.
He was, very much Mr Caerphilli. But, an enormous swing to Plaid. And, of course, Plaid standing very much in the opposite of what Reform are putting forward, but some really crap media coverage afterwards. It's almost as if everybody'd written their stuff up looking to continue the Reformer on the rise, Labour on the wane story, and the nice old tolerant Plaiders got in the way.
Yes, and I mean it started for. I was just as I think I said in one tweet, screaming at the radio because here's a really pivotal by-election that puts a party that supports independence now, as one person picked up, and as I've mentioned actually. If you listen to that wee extra podcast that you've just mentioned there, Fraser. But I mean, Plaid's tactic is to get in, run the Senate for a term in much the same way as Alex Salmond ran Holyrood for a term before you get to a big enough vote that gives you a mandate to go for an Indie ref. I've got to say the Welsh are completely looking at it's almost like a carbon copy in terms of tactics. I did write a column saying, you might want to just think about that a wee bit because even though all of that resulted in getting an independence referendum, the Brits are once bitten, twice shy, doubtless, for everybody. And it didn't result in a yes vote. So, nonetheless, that's what they're planning to do. So just right now, a Plaid government will not go, great, we've won, let's have an independence referendum. Unless they change, right? But still, that's a pretty major moment there. And there's the slots. I mean, if you've worked for broadcasters like the Beeb, you know that there's kind of slots. The 8:10 slot on the Today programme is the main political story of the day. And it was the Caerphilli by-election and it was Labour and Reform. What do these guys have to do to, the victor to be able to get on and say what it means for them? You actually, back in the day, we would have people sitting with blooming stopwatches at points to do with elections, actually calculating how much time was spent with each of them so it was equal. There was not even a mention, not a sniff of the winning candidates. So, I mean, totally shocking. By the by, it looked like, there was quite a lot of analysis afterwards that looked at tactical voting. And it is interesting because it looks like when Reform sort of start to get stronger, definitely a lot of Labour and other supporters are switching to the party most likely to be able to beat Reform. So they did have a look at that and found that Labour supporters, Lib Dems and Greens, well, here it is. The Lib Dems and Greens won 9% between them last year in different elections, in the Westminster elections. This time, in that by-election, their combined vote fell to 3%. Now, that may not, that might not be a hill of beans, but actually, given that people could see reform coming, all the kind of left of centre people just decided, well, that's it. But the fact that Plaid is the front runner is very, very significant. And, nobody seems to want to discuss that.
And it's been a Labour constituency since the 1920s. This is completely historic proportions. It's a kind of Hamilton by-election level of breakthrough, and really warranted a much greater analysis than it actually got, I think.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, the other, there's all sorts of other bits going on where one guy writing the Spectator's line was even that this is good news for Keir Starmer. Right? You're left thinking, really?
That sounds like clickbait. You're like, that doesn't make any sense. I'll need to read this now to understand why.
Well, it worked, right? but it's because Reform's vote was 6% lower than the poll had suggested. So, that's the one that's sort of saying, on the face of it, voters turn out to stop the Farage bandwagon. So this is everybody trying to figure out whether the poll results, and of course, since then, I mean, gosh, there's like a poll a minute here, but it's all UK stuff as well, so it doesn't give you a huge insight. I mean, there's one, the IPPR poll that Alba did that refers to Scotland, but a lot of the ones that are catching the eye are UK-wide, suggesting that Reform, are second and Labour is limping along. In fact, almost hand in hand with the Greens now, because the Greens have doubled their vote share. But anyway, it's all sort of the question in people's mind is whether or not people are ready to kind of give a bloody nose to to the establishment, which Labour are now, but would actually begin to think, could you trust these guys, Farage, to run a government? I mean, there's been plenty of hijinks happening in the councils they run. I think it's Kent where they've had 2 or 3 councillors have left and been kicked out and all sorts of stuff. Which, if the press were more interested, you might know something about. But so it is amazing how these guys are also suggesting that what happened in Caerphilli plays to the folk in Labour who want Starmer to worry more about winning left voters than trying to outdo Reform. But I mean, good luck with that.
Also, and I think you could say that, not so much do you trust Reform to run anything, but would you trust Reform to run a devolved administration? Now, obviously, we wouldn't trust Reform to run a menage, but the fact is that it is a very personality-driven party. It's very much focused on Nigel Farage and 1 or 2 kind of key lieutenants, things where they're much less well organised and are kind of further out, local council level that we've seen falling apart already. They've no Scottish leader. I don't suppose there's a Welsh leader either. They've no real infrastructure. You would be expecting parties like Reform to perhaps do better at a by-election as a protest vote, but you've almost got a sort of double protest vote for Labour in this result. And just a fantastic come through for a very nice guy, I have to say, Lindsay Whittle, and wish them well as he settles down, and hopefully he'll be able to retain that seat when it comes to the election in 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, obviously this focuses minds completely because, I mean, if that could be a headline in The Spectator, good news for Keir Starmer, I think it could be good news for independents. I mean, there's quite a few other things you could start to chuck in the middle of that. I mean, I don't know where we'll come to it, but the Irish presidential election was quite a livener. So, all the nations are beginning to move towards more left candidates. And obviously the Greens within England are beginning to kind of pull left voters who feel pretty disenfranchised. And then, of course, there's your party. So, Fraser, I'm so glad I'm not steering my way through this. Where next?
Where next? I think we're briefly alight since we're talking about nice Sir Keir getting a further drubbing. His preferred candidate, Bridget Phillipson, who got umpteen big ups during his leader speech at the recent Labour Party conference, lost quite spectacularly in 54-46, where we heard that before, to Lucy Powell, a more left-leaning leaning even candidate and somebody that he'd sacked recently from the cabinet.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, actually, I sort of started trying to kind of amass a sort of what a bad week it's been for Labour, losing Caerphilli, then it's grooming gang inquiry being thrown into disarray, junior doctors striking, the Chinese business that we're not going into because it's mind-blowingly complicated, the prison system letting that sexual predator out by accident, catching him again, and then, the kind of deputy election. But of course, the hits keep coming with all sorts of other problems. Yet, the one comment I thought about Lucy Powell that was very interesting was that because she's actually not in the cabinet, she can be quite a thorn in his side. If this was she's the deputy leader of the Labour Party, but she's not the sort of deputy prime minister. Isn't that your man, David Lammy?
David Lammy, yes.
Yeah,
Mr. Popular.
Yeah, Mr. Popular. But anyway, if you were if he's in the cabinet, she's not. So she can basically continue to have kind of pretty strong sideways swipes from a position that she holds now, deputy leader, which means that it will attract some attention. I noticed that there's been a bit of snash going on about how low the vote was. I mean, apparently the number of eligible voters was 16%. Which is, I mean, she won 54% of what was cast, but 16%, jings. And there's a lot of criticism of, it's a free world and people can get into politics however they want. But a lot of people saying she's never had a proper job. Now, I mean, if you're going to start throwing that around, you could probably knock out half of every party actually these days.
Well, I think there might be a little bit more than half in the 2026 candidates for Holyrood, certainly from the Scottish National Party.
Indeed. But I mean, this sort of becomes relevant as well when we finally jump to the Irish presidential thing, because I think people like the idea that folk have got a little bit of something grit underneath their fingernails. But anyway, there she is. She's in there, and she worked with Ed Miliband. Bit of speculation that he might be having another kind of pop, as all the polls predict, trouble for Keir Starmer, and then even the suggestion that he might not even get to December or January. And I notice, I mean, I'm so glad I've actually signed on to this wee Substack thing from Peter Kellner, because he fairly is turning up wee gems. But and I can't remember it was actually John McTernan that he was watching. So this is like all these people you don't have to listen to, right? So we do, and you don't have to do it. But anyway, John McTernan, apparently, who has now become something of a hammer of Labour, now that, things have not gone his way. But anyway, he looked at some of the amendments that were passed at the last Labour conference and discovered that for some reason, the thing that you could only challenge the leader once a year has gone. You can challenge the leader whenever you like. Whether that will amount to a hill of beans, because, you've got, it's not, the obvious contenders are all sitting bruised or not in Westminster. And yet, there's an awful lot of speculation that there's just no way, especially with a budget coming like what it will be, that Keir Starmer can turn this around. But still, people are, it's an extraordinary thing when you're in the zone, how you just can't see the writing on the wall. But still, there we are.
I have a terrible job sometimes recognizing people or knowing what their names are, and can normally have an absolutely unbelievable kind of potted history of all the backstory, and I met you here and this is the conversation we had, and I can remember that in vivid detail once I've actually worked out who they are. I remember going, I think it was a Catalan thing or some kind of meal on the South Bank in London, across the road literally from Westminster, and getting there slightly early, which again is unusual for me, and seeing John McTiernan at the table that we were at, and just having that kind of, he is a somebody, isn't he? A somebody, who is that? And then going, oh God, that's John. And then reversing back out of their place at great speed and going round the block a few times to come back in when there were one or two extra people to kind of soak up the conversation. I thought, I'm not getting left at a table on my own with John McTiernan. That's just
Well, I was actually sat next to him in, I'm trying to remember, it was the first by-election. We're calling them all Rutherglen now, which is wrong, but the first one that Michael Shanks won, one of them must be called Hamilton. So
Hamilton
whatever.
was the recent one, and
Right.
Shanks was
Okay.
an
So
Irish
Rutherglen
one.
was the first one. So anyway, I was at that one. I was sat next to John McTiernan. So anyway, we were both interviewed. We were being interviewed by Martin Geisler, one after the other, and I can't remember. I just couldn't what I said, but I actually just couldn't stop winding him up, essentially. And eventually, he got so annoyed that he just turned to me and said, "I am the authority." And I said, "Ooh, I just thought my job here is done.
Yeah.
It's just to reveal people as they are." And funnily enough, when I was then back for the next one, well, whatever one it was, the second one, the Hamilton one, is it? Actually, Martin said, "Boy, that was some moment when John McTiernan was saying that." Basically, I am the authority. I'm the judge on everything. So anyway, that's our John McTiernan stuff, which is by the by.
So, but yes, talking of upsets or kind of interesting happenings, Catherine Connolly won the Irish presidency with a landslide victory, although with a huge number of spoilt ballot papers, as an independent, kind of giving a bit of a fair fecht to the two established Irish parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And coming through the middle after various attempts to smear her for just being a jobbing barrister and taking on clients in the way that you have to do, what they call the cab rank rule, which is where you if you're up next, you're up next, and it doesn't matter whether you're kind of keen on the idea or not, then you're kind of expected to take the case.
Indeed. I mean, I did actually consult Pat on this. I mentioned it last week, and I thought, well, actually, just to see if Pat's keeping his hand in. By gum, I mean, I've got a kind of text thing here from him that is long enough to break into a small tract. But anyway, so thank you, Pat, for that, if you're listening. But the story goes back a bit, because there were quite a lot of spoilt papers. Relatively speaking, there were 13% spoilt papers. At the last election, there was 1.3%. So something did happen. It doesn't take away from Catherine Connolly, but just a wee minute. There was a few candidates, kind of thinking that they would stand. There was an anti-immigration boxer guy. He didn't get enough support. But then there was a Conservative barrister, Maria Steen. She got 18 Airtas MPs. That's, from the kind of parliament. 20 is what you need. Now, she was kind of hacked off because apparently last time around 2018, you could say that if you got support from councils, that was enough. And she had something like 20, I think. But for some reason, and if I was to be able to understand this one, I would have only spent the last 3 days trying to figure this out, as opposed to, well, let's not exaggerate, a wee while. For some reason, the councils were not allowed this time. So she kind of fell short, and there's a lot of people hacked off that basically the MPs get to decide essentially who can get on the presidential ballot. And that doesn't feel like what the presidential thing is supposed to be about, because it's meant to be, outside the grip of the political parties within the Dáil. So there was a spoil the vote campaign, which it looks like she says she wasn't part of it, but it looks like quite a lot of the spoilt papers were about her. Sinn Féin actually pointed out that people living in the north couldn't vote for the president, even though the conception is that it's for all Ireland, nor could Irish people living abroad, which is, so there's kind of quite a few question marks about that. So there's problem number one, right? Problem number two is Fianna Fáil's candidate, a guy called Jim Gavin. He withdrew 3 weeks ago after saying that he'd made a mistake that was not in keeping with my character and the standards I set myself. This was after a news report saying that he basically owed 3,000 quid to a former tenant. A presidential debate brought it up, and he said, "I'm very sorry that happened. I'll look at it and deal with it." And he stood down. Now, this was a bit of a thing because he was a pretty popular guy. I mean, he was a former Irish military pilot. He's an aviation expert, but more than that, and I feel Pat swinging in from the corner here. He was a GAA, Gaelic Athletic Association football manager. So he managed the Dublin team for 9 years when it won 6 All-Ireland senior football championship titles. And if anyone doubts how much that matters in, Celtic countries, I present to you this morning's bulletins, which are full of the minor upset there is in Celtic at the moment when all other stories have been relegated to, the third division. So
even I clicked on that because it pops up on Twitter very mysteriously with a kind of a statement from Celtic Football Club. And I, who have no interest in football whatsoever, was still moved to find out what was going on. So yes.
Well, indeed, but I mean, once you've found out that there's been a bit of a rammy, I mean, that's it. It's like a little tittle tattle thing along with all the other tittle tattles. But my God, we're going to be hearing that top of the news for the next 2 days. Anyway, my point simply was that this guy Jim Gavin was obviously a pretty popular kind of candidate to put forward, given all the kind of success he'd had in the Irish footy, basically, and he was selected over a party stalwart called Billy Kelleher and Bob Geldof, because Bob swung in late on and sort of said, I think I could fucking have a go at this myself, and was actually told, I'm sorry, we've already got Jim Gavin. So he then stormed off and said, I could fucking stand myself then, and everyone went, no. So Jim Gavin was Fianna Fáil's guy, pretty controversial in the party. And then when this, came up, and he'd actually had a pretty bad press conference when he seemed to be backing Israel. Ooh, not in Ireland. So basically, Fianna Fáil's campaign just imploded, but his name stayed on the ballot paper. So presumably that could have raised more questions about spoilt papers and so on. And it really raises a lot of questions then, because the suggestion is that the Taoiseach and the leader of Fianna Fáil, Michael Martin, his days could be numbered, because he was the guy who decided that Jim Gavin was going to be, the kind of was going to set the heather alight. Heather Humphreys, Fine Gael's candidate, was kind of a bit chewed in and was forced by the looks of it to do a very negative campaign along the lines of what you were just suggesting, which many people felt was not in character with her, but like she'd been basically told this is the way you got to run. Just not a good move. And then you've got Catherine Connolly, who is not, this is all that's mentioned above.
Of course, she had quite a lot of sectarian abuse. Her husband is in the Orange Order. I think she was pitching a sort of, I'm going to be the president for all of Ireland, and we can have, different communities, because look, here's me married to Mr. Orange Order, and she get pelters for that, and as you say, this kind of attempt to smear Catherine Connolly, I don't think went down very well at all, because she just comes across as quite a nice lady. So yes, on you go.
So the Orange husband was who? Catherine Connolly or Heather Humphreys?
Heather Humphreys.
Right, that could have been confusing and weird. Yes. So anyway, Catherine Connolly, no taking it away from her. She is a left-wing Republican. She was endorsed by Kneecap. She ran on a free public transport ticket. Housing is a human right. Support for the Irish language. She was the only fluent Irish speaker. And this keeps coming back to this. It's not a small thing. And she's determined to have a referendum on reunification. And she has said, I will stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people as long as I have breath in my body. So that gives you a wee kind of tilt of where she's going. And she had pelters, suggestions that she was a Hamas supporter, which she dealt with incredibly well. Just on her background, she is one of 14 children. Her dad was a carpenter and a shipbuilder. Her mum died when she was 9 years old. I mean, she lived in one of the worst schemes. It looks like Galway there, and kind of, so she didn't have it easy. She has degrees in clinical psychology and law. She was in the Labour Party. She left. She was re-elected in her own right as an independent to the Dáil. She was critical of the of Europe's, she called it, blatant neoliberal agenda, building up the arms industry. So, a lot of people really quite liked that side of her. And when it came to then just her standing as a candidate, she was backed by the Social Democrats, People Before Profit, and a lot of independent candidates. She got Labour Party support, and then just towards the end, Sinn Féin. And that it looks like it was pretty important because those guys are pretty good on the doors, and they contributed not just volunteers but money to her campaign. She got the Workers' Party, the Communist Party, and the kind of absolute sort of cherry on the cake here was a viral video she did. I don't know if you've seen it, of her doing keepy uppies.
Oh no, I need to put that.
Honestly, it's utterly astonishing. I mean, now that everybody can fake everything, there was a stage where I thought she can't possibly be that limber. It's like, where did I had I am still a bit of a pool queen, and that speaks to a sort of strange episode at, a couple of years at school. But where did she learn to do kippy uppies like that? So that kind of broadened her base out, beyond what was already a pretty impressive tally. She apparently got 83% of the 18 to 34-year-olds to support her. And she's saying that it's a foregone conclusion there will be a poll for Irish unity and a yes vote, and she just wants to move on with Dublin and Westminster to agree for a date. So, watch out for Catherine. Then she's going some. But you won't have heard about any of that as well.
Any of
the Irish presidential election, I would imagine.
No, exactly. Well, none of that really filtered across, although I thought it was quite fascinating to sort of dip into. And she certainly came across, I thought, as by far and away the best candidate. And it's not a shock that she's won. I think there's been criticism from the state of Israel suggesting that there shouldn't be any Israeli tourism to Ireland because she's been such a forthright supporter of the Palestinian people, and called the Israeli state a terrorist state, and has repeated the remarks that President Higgins has made about genocide. I don't think she'll be losing too much sleep about that. But, these are the things that are happening, one of our closest neighbours, a country that the United Kingdom shares a land border with, that has huge implications for the UK state. And, you barely heard a peep about it.
Yes, and I should say, Pat's research, there was a turnout of 46%, basically, so a lot better than the Deputy Labour leadership. But, okay, that's reasonable these days. Connolly got 63% of the votes that were valid, and that's the highest percentage since the role was created in 1938, and the highest number of first preference votes. So lots of people, this wasn't a long, complex voting transfer STV business. This was actually pretty much people just wanted her.
Yeah.
So I hope she comes to Scotland, and we can, we should ask if she wants to come on the podcast.
We certainly should.
Let's get a bit brazen about these things. I think, Fraser,
Speaking of international contributions, we will have the Craig Murray podcast, hopefully for subscribers, tomorrow, talking about the actions in Geneva and New York that Liberation Stroke Salvo have been engaged in, and that's an interesting listen. So that should be available tomorrow for subscribers, and hopefully everybody else, I think, sometime next week.
And just, and there we are. So we interviewed Sarah Salyers a wee while ago, and then it took a while to get Craig, amongst his many jumpings across the big pond.
There you go. You're doing your own links now.
No, we're right. But then the point was, little minx, he didn't tell us he was going to just shoot off and, join Dump Alba and jump into your party.
Well, you see, you've been Pat, you'd have kept the jumping metaphor going. Yes, so he's jumped to your party. Along with Hugh Kerr, would be an interesting combination for old your party to get its head around. I think it's a very interesting thing, setting up a new party and how you would actually want to go about it. And this kind of organic growth is the most kind of people-powered, ground-up way of doing it, but it can end up, I think, possibility of becoming a slightly weird, amorphous blob. Hugh Kerr, how can I put this in the politest way? Is possibly not the most careful person with his language when he's speaking, and how that's going to kind of rub along against a kind of Zara Sultana following 20-year-old will be interesting to see. Craig is very liberal and has obviously been talking about your party for quite a long while and has made some strident criticisms. I think he was involved in early discussions of setting up your party, so it's not a surprise that he has joined, but he's had some very strong criticism of the organisation of your party and how it's coming together, and the fact that he believes that it's been kind of heavily controlled, and that some of the open meetings that they've had so far where they deliberately split everybody up into kind of little breakout groups is a way of
For heaven's sake, everybody does that.
Exactly. But, but his point is, that this is all just about the sort of place people at each table kind of controlling things and keeping stuff on. And it's going to be a self-selecting group of people that finally get to go to its first conference, right, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. So, it's an organic thing. Your party has not had its troubles to seek. It does seem to be getting a fair bit of momentum with these independent supporting profiles moving across to it. So, the wind's a bit in its sails. We'll see where it's going to.
Yeah, but with all due respect to Craig and Mr. Kerr, it's not about that generation. It's not about me. It's not about, we're all past it, basically. I mean, where they're picking up support is from younger people. And that was the three. I'm not saying, obviously, if they get some older folk, they're not going to sort of, chuck us out. I was going to go just out of curiosity to sort of see what the line was, but it just was, I didn't have a car at the time, and getting from North Fife to Glasgow, in fact, Maryhill, and then getting back again, no. So, there's three younger kind of councillors, Green councillors, who explained why they were jumping ship. There was also Scotia have done a very interesting, I'll put the link up for their podcast, which is called A Nest of Fearties, which kind of, it's a good name, gives you the sort of tilt of their stuff. But they did an interview with Zara Sultana, and I'll say it's a very good interview, actually. For somebody who, every time someone who's, spends their life down the road, basically, comes up here, they just get their foot right up and they stick it straight in. I mean, without exception.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn being a particularly good example of that normally. So
yeah. Although, at least Corbyn did say, look, I'm not too, if you guys, yep, fine, another referendum, fair play, right? So at least he kind of, even if he couldn't pronounce place names properly and get coasts right and stuff like that, his principle was kind of, if the Irish should have self-determination, why shouldn't the Scots? But I mean, she manages to get most stuff right, actually, and is quite humble at points where she should be about, and manages to kind of, jump around the problem of, are you for independence or not? Would you, actually, she's asked, would you, let unionists who are opposed to independence in? I mean, obviously the answer is yes.
Asylum, yeah.
But it's an interesting experience, I'd guess, to be interviewed by people who have such a presumption strongly in favour of independence that you, as a kind of former Labour MP, are almost on the back foot about even the idea that you would have unionists within your new party. So it's not a bad process for her to have gone through, I guess, because that will, I'm not making an equivalence here, but I mean, I was only in Wales for 2 days. It sort of rocked my world quite a bit. And I'd guess that all of this will have certainly given her some food for thought. Now, dear knows, new parties are a total nightmare to set up. And yet I actually know 3 people who are joined straight up to your party, don't care that there was a burch with the, sign-ups and everything, don't care about any of that, because they just want something that looks like a vehicle for socialist policies, and they don't think it's the Greens. So it's an interesting development, and they've got a conference, I think, coming up towards the end of November. So that will they'll have to get to a stage there where it's not just sort of breakout kumbaya groups and everything, but they're going to have to come up with some sort of what's the next steps, who is in charge, elections, the sort of stuff that usually kills things pretty quickly. But I think let's not just, there is a definite enthusiasm
There's a real
there.
Move there, and it's new and it's fresh, and it will be really interesting to see what happens to it. And if you end up having Labour for Independence band back together under a proper party and giving people who would be natural Labour supporters a home to go to that is fully on board with Scotland becoming an independent country, I think that's a really big move. I think it's a very significant change. And as I keep saying, it means that the political landscape is more fractured and it is more pro-Indy, which rather potentially negates the idea of writing, your option to choose, or whatever it was, the September Scottish Government paper, which says that it has to be a kind of majority of SNP MPs, which is the precedent, rather than just saying this will eventually be a vote of our parliament. There's plenty of other countries that have become independent just by having a vote in their parliament of independent supporting members. So I think we need to look at the landscape as it is, and if there's going to be a proper kind of full-throated socialist party with gutso and people picking up, a big chunk of votes and taking disaffected Labour voters who are not minded to vote SNP, but who are open to the idea of independence, then I think that's all to the good.
And actually, Stephen Geffens wrote a very good article in the Scotsman, which I must say I rarely read these days, but making all of these points with, again, I'll dig out the link, but copious all the examples you were alluding to there of other countries where obviously in a proportional parliament, the combination of yes or independent supporting parties has made an impact. He was also noting a kind of comment that I now can't find and think about quickly enough that Keir Starmer made, where apparently he said something to the effect of, if there was a substantial yes majority, then that they would have to think about that. Now, I'm sure everybody who's an independent supporter is going, thought we were going somewhere with this, actually. I sat down for a moment there, but still, it was, whatever the phrasing was, and it's in Stephen's column, it's what prompted it. It was just the first time there was any acknowledgement that actually something might be going on. And it followed the Caerphilli by-election. So obviously, there's kind of stuff afoot. The one thing that has struck me, though, was this IPPR poll has had various legs to it. And there was another aspect of it about basically deep-seated pessimism about the country's future. And that's amongst Scots. I'm sure if this was done amongst, the whole of Britain, it would be pretty bad. But still, there's a kind of a discovery that you can argue about whatever you want, independence, otherwise, the cost of living, the NHS, but few voters think any government can make meaningful progress, and I think that's true, actually. That people are just beginning to get the stage now where they just think there's so much that just doesn't work here. And it's kind of a deep-seated set of problems which we just are not going to be able to shift. We're just moving the dial around on it. And it's depressing to see Scots in there, but why would it be otherwise with, so much that we can see around us that doesn't work? I was nearly on debate night last week, and then they knew that the questions coming from Fife were all about education, because there had been a survey, and it turned out that actually the Scotland has got the highest rates of violence in the classroom, apparently in the UK. And then it seems that Fife is the highest in Scotland. And that is serious injuries to school staff, fractures, dislocations, loss of consciousness. Now you can, there's plenty of ways you can look at all of this. There was on debate night, Jenny Gilruth was on saying, okay, we had COVID and it's taken a reset time. Kids don't know how to sit still anymore. And there we go. Also, it's actually people have been encouraged to come forward to make more reports of attacks. Okay. There was a bit of a focus on the inclusion policy that you can't actually exclude pupils. But I was sitting at the same time as kind of looking at this, because I wasn't on, because they chose, fine, they chose an education expert because they could see it was going to be all about education. And I just thought, listening to everybody, I just thought nobody's managing to sort of really speak to this, because it is kind of shocking. Now, at the same time as I was sitting thinking about this, I've been editing, paper editing, because I kind of do the stuff anymore. But anyway, you can still track it paper wise, send it over to Gavin in Helsinki, who's editing away, all the finished stuff. And really, I know you can't say, look, I wouldn't start from here, but I wouldn't start from here. If you have kids, again, just keep coming back to this. I was listening over and over again to the teachers who were explaining who were aghast at the idea that kids here were going to school at 4 and 5. I mean, just aghast. And we're saying because their kids start at 7 and they have a preschool year when they're 6. And before that, they have 3 years of kindergarten from the age of 3. And all they learn then, they don't run any of the 3 hours at all. All they learn is how to play together. They're just learning cooperation, how to behave, what it's like to turn up. That's what that final year before they go to school's about. It's trying to get them to just get used to a sort of formal environment where they can't just do what they want. They even discuss disappointment. They teach disappointment, getting over disappointment as an actual subject all the way through primary school. So the thing is, here we are, we're sort of sitting, with people, at the trade unions, the teachers, the experts, politicians, kind of talking around a subject where I'm now convinced that what we're doing is we're setting up children to fail. And fair enough, people will say, but what's changed? There's a perception that there's a loss of discipline in the schoolroom, and there's never been a kindergarten stage. So, it looks as if something has changed even within our own psyche. But it just strikes me, you can decide to just keep hammering on like this, or we could use this as a moment to really take a bit of a step change and look at the evidence of other countries, 82% of the world's other countries, and think about whether or not we need to really radically change what we're doing before kids get to school. And of course, we've got poverty. We're still one of the, if not the most unequal member of the OECD. We must be in the top 3. So that's also something these other countries haven't got. And of course, we're not going to get anywhere with that till we're independent.
Yeah, and it's the inequality that gets you. It's not necessarily the relative poverty, but the inequality is an amplifier. These are the things that also kind of suit reform with sort of lazy solutions or kind of sloganizing. It's the SNP's soft on crime, or it's soft on school discipline, and you just need to get their wrongins out. But the majority of young people who are facing difficulties are people that have home lives that you couldn't even begin to relate to, that have huge difficulties. Again, there are funding problems. Where's the kind of support base, or where's the let's let you go and chill out for a bit, or help you actually become a kind of fully functioning member of the school community, rather than actually either siloing you off, or, as has been suggested, giving people a kind of shadow timetable that you're actually not there as much as you should be, but you don't count as an exclusion. I think there's lots of different aspects to this story that are not really being teased out particularly well defensively by the education secretary, and that are not being sort of mainstreamed and explained to the public. So you just get a kind of headline, Scottish schools are violent, and it's very easy to fall into a trap there, a kind of reformist type trap that just wants simple solutions. And I think that, again, is where the attractiveness comes from. You were talking about the level of hopelessness earlier. These kind of simple MAGA style, well, we'll turn it on its head. We'll commandeer all of that. It's just going to happen on Tuesday, type things that Trump does, where they're seeing results, whether they're good or bad. They're kind of determined action being taken, is what I think is leading some people towards reform, whereas more kind of mainstream governments just kind of plod along, and we have to have a consultation and pull our beard about it and think about it. That might lead us in nicely next week to the Land Reform Act and all of the different amendments there are being. The campaigners are calling for beefy land reform and for something proper to be done, but you end up with a piece of legislation that's full of holes and doesn't really actually get to the heart of the issue. The same with housing. We talked about the Build Canada Homes, the kind of decisive action that the Canadian government are taking to deal with the lack of homes.
Modelling themselves on Finland, I have to say. Sorry, I will stop this.
Whereas you don't have necessarily, you've got a lot of kind of lower level things happening in a big wide spread in Scotland, little bits here and there, a pilot for outdoor education rather than going, everybody's having outdoor education, or looking at the models you've talked about previously where you have an entire year out of school to just focus on getting your outdoor skills and your creativity polished up.
I've got to say, obviously all of these are independent countries. Iceland, Finland, Iceland with the Planet Youth stuff, basically sports after school. Finland with all the stuff that we're talking about there, and Denmark with their year off at 15. They're independent countries. They can move the dials. They can shift stuff around. And okay, to be fair, we're not. I can't remember what I was reading this week. A couple of people making fairly cogent cases that actually devolution has just done what was designed to do, which is give the appearance that you've got some control over the levers and leave you to kind of end up arguing amongst yourselves, not having quite the boldness to kind of, use the machinery as well as it could be, and not being able to engineer the inspiration needed to make the next jump towards independence, but sucking all your energy up in the meantime. And, there's definitely something to be said for that. Although, I'm going off to Carnoustie to show the wind film tonight. There are so many places in which the SNP, the Scottish Government, could be throwing the switch. They could be just a lot bolder. And there's a very good piece actually in the Herald that's looking at the whole ScotWind scandal. The lost wealth that we've gone through again, basically with losing the renewable income, and how absolutely flawed that process was. I know people kind of think, yeah, we know about this, that's fine. But when you really look at the enormity of what we've kind of missed on that one, and it's actually a young, is it Laurie McFarlane from the
Economist,
Future Economy Scotland man, who has gone through the whole thing and the way that they approached it. And when you look at the way they've approached it, you just go, God Almighty! It just is so, it's only me kind of approach, instead of having a little bit more belief and confidence in what could be the outcome and look around you at the other. Only 4 of the 29 companies that own ScotWind developers are even headquartered in the UK. It's a very interesting and depressing article. And that's what I mean, because if you go beyond, if you look at this and sort of gumming problems instead of trying to fix them and not being bold, that's depressing. Just the level of things not getting fixed properly. I know this is a small point, people. I know, right? When I was travelling off to Wales, went to Central Station, thought, I'll spend a penny before, in fact, I don't even need to spend a penny now before I get on the train. And the loos are down steps, right? So everybody, they're travelling, so they've all got bags. So everybody is hurpling up and down these steps. One person sort of lost control of their bag and off it went down the steps into somebody else. Where I'm sure, can we do escalators or something? Wouldn't that be Edinburgh Airport? Wouldn't that be another one where you arrive? I know people shouldn't be using airplanes as much as is being done. But if you are doing it, the fact that the first thing you're confronted with in Edinburgh, perhaps as Glasgow, I haven't been there for a while, is, just a huge step of steps with people with mobility issues and bags and stuff like that. And you just think, here, in terms of investment, if something is still working, if it's still got, a little bit of mileage left in it, then nothing gets fixed or invested in. And that's enough to make you feel really depressed because you go away somewhere else, you see that stuff generally in the public realm works, and you come back to somewhere where we just have to skip over the fact that so much is just shabby and kind of broken.
And even your chocolate biscuits aren't even covered in chocolate.
Really?
Oh, do you not see this? This is a major scandal of epic national proportions. The chocolate club, if you like a lot of chocolate on your biscuit, join our club, is no longer chocolatey enough to describe itself as a chocolate biscuit. It's mostly a palm oil covered cocoa product.
Right. See, there you are. It's like, well, why are we? Well, the sun's shining, but the thing is, okay. So fair enough. That is making perhaps people think, yeah, quick solutions with reform.
Aye.
Or pretty radical solutions, actually, with Greens, maybe your party, anybody else who wants to put their head over the parapet as saying, no, we really need to get to the bottom of this. But if none of that works, where do you go then? To me, that's the really depressing bit, because it feels like we'll go through another iteration of swinging this way and that way. We won't fix the voting system. We won't get enough energy up in the SNP to make a really good, strong bid for independence. And we'll sit like this for years. That's my worst moments, right? It doesn't stop. It isn't, strangely enough, it doesn't stop me from kind of still thinking about how to argue for what we could be doing to make stuff better and creating a bit of a sort of, hopefully an outlook which says there is no good reason why in some medium to long-term future, a country with our assets and our geography and our outlook, our political and cultural outlooks should not be on a par with our neighbours who are doing much better. There is no good reason except all of this heaviness, this kind of just getting used to putting up with stuff that doesn't really work so that you can move a really stiff dial one or two little points along, which is where I think politically, this is also where support for Greens, your party, and sorry, everybody else I'm forgetting in the moment, is coming from, because I think folk realise we're all going to give up. I mean, I know 2 or 3 families who are leaving Scotland. They're all yesers. They've got Irish people in their family. God damn their teeth. If I only hadn't been born in Wolverhampton, but still. And, this is not good enough. Like, to think we're just sitting here because we're marooned now, because we can't skip off easily to the EU and go somewhere else. We're going to lose people the same way we've always lost them if there's just this feeling of lethargy.
But there is this huge opportunity. And that Alba Party poll that found that Alba was on 6% on the regional list found that independents had a double-digit lead on 52 to 48 with the don't knows taken out. There's a whole shift in the tectonic plates, and the lead up to the 2026 election could be seized on and could really be something that fires us up.
Yes, thank you very much for that reorientation. It's to me.
I don't think it's going to fire us up if we hide it all and say only the SNP are the legitimate, outcome of this firing upness. If we kind of self-select, but the people of Scotland will decide, and if there's an independence majority in the Parliament, it won't really matter what the Scottish National Party thinks as the government. It'll be the party majority in the Parliament that carries it forward. I wonder if there'll be a majority for nuclear power that old Ed is going to foist on Scotland on day one when the Labour Party sweeps to power on May the 7th.
Yeah, I mean, this is really just quite gobsmacking how off the money this is, actually. But I think there was a report last week, which I very probably have lost track of mentally, but it was the Labour Party coming out with their, we're going to get was it net zero by 2030, or I can't remember quite what the target was, but it was definitely something of that ilk. And then the big debate since then has been whether or not there's any chance of getting there. Several reports suggesting that everything is moving too slowly for the jobs that are going to be lost and lost already in the North Sea on oil and gas, shifting over to the green sector. I mean, you'd have to say that there probably are a lot more well-paying jobs in oil and gas I can't remember who it was. It was explaining the concentration of energy value within, if you like, whatever you want to call a unit of oil, is massive and justifies the expense of the rig, the expense of the pipeline system, the expense of everything that goes to get those drops out because it is so valued. The units you get of renewables have a lower value, so it just is harder to get the very top jobs out of them. And once they're built, they should be, obviously need to be maintained. So there's some of that, it's never going to be that.
And,
yes.
Constant sort of titivating and looking after in the way that a gas turbine does or a nuclear power station does, or as you say, a drilling well. It just kind of sits there chundling around making you money.
And it should, there's, maybe it's actually not, although everybody likes the idea that we just effortlessly kind of transition from all the guys that run oil and gas platforms and onshore and so on, and they all just shift straight over to the green transition. Although you'd have to say Ed Miliband made a great play of, there's plumbers, there's all sorts of people that will need to be involved in this. It's not just, turbine experts. It might just not be a realistic thing to be putting this in people's minds as the kind of acme of success, because in the end, the reason that this should lower our bills is because it doesn't have to have this infrastructure of all the wages on the top of it. But hey, it still is because of all the cockamamie crap about the way the energy system in Britain works. If you've listened to this podcast, you know some of the rest, right? But this brings us back to the nuclear thing, which is like, gee whiz, if Ed's just really wanting to push this kind of Anas Sarwar shonky kind of bandwagon over the edge, just come in with a few more kind of, announcements like that. Why don't you? Because Ed sort of basically says that he's going to bring a whole posse of the international nuclear family to Scotland to basically force through new nuclear plants in Scotland should Labour win in May next year. Which has got so many sort of jaw-dropping, you're not really working in the real world, Ed, my dear. Quite apart from the fact that he gets the date wrong. It's May the 7th, not the 6th. But, an easy mistake from a distance. But, it's just, it won't make any difference because they're not going to win. But it's kind of quite extraordinary when you begin to realise how much they're not getting, that you can't do this overarching, we'll just drift in and do this over your heads, when the future of Scotland unquestionably has got to be a mix of renewables.
Completely. And, we're not seeing any kind of proper national strategy for that, as you've highlighted under the wind policy that we would do if Scotland was an independent country. But I hardly think it's going to be a great sales routine telling people in Scotland to vote Labour next year in order to get more nuclear. I can't see there a huge clamour for nuclear power that is going to take Labour over the line. We get quite a lot of it here because obviously we've got Torness in East Lothian. And so there's quite a lot of Labour activity and articles in the local paper. And of course, we're blessed with having Douglas Alexander as the local Member of Parliament and Secretary of State for Scotland. So they're quite often couriers in the East Lothian articles in the East Lothian Courier about, the SNP sort of negating these potential new nuclear jobs. So we will see how that develops, but it's a curious streak to be kind of hanging your hat on.
Well, it really is, because he also said in this speech that he's ordered GB Energy to assess Scottish sites to host new nuclear projects. And you see, it's like bullshit bingo. When you mention GB Energy, bang, what comes into your mind immediately? 12 jobs, is it? Or is it 13 or something?
And more in England than Ireland and Scotland.
Yeah, and the guy who's a heat bummer is still in Manchester. So you see, you want to avoid even saying that at the moment, Ed, if you're really on it, because for us here, that's just rubbing salt in the wounds. And then if you want to get on about, so it looks like it's Torness and Hunterston, that there could be new nuclear power stations, which he would instruct Great British Energy to do. I mean, we've been through this before, but the amount of delay there is, the cost overruns on it. It was actually a very good debate at SNP conference where there was chapter and verse on quite how ludicrously out of control the two Sizewell and I've suddenly forgotten the Hinckley are down the road, and what we're going to that's going to be the big point. I mean, Miliband says nuclear power would be a very, very big issue in the Holyrood campaign. Bring it on, big man. I mean, just you do that. You swing in, force Anas Sarwar to kind of, well, he talks about nuclear already, but you make that a pivot point. Right, fine.
Good luck. Well, I'm off to see the Meta Gamma on Friday with Delina McLennan and all sorts of exciting people at the Traverse, talking about the SS Metagamma from the Butt of Barra to the plains of Canada in the 1920s.
Yep, this was the boat that took people after they'd been waiting for a really good deal on land. This is really the one that, to put it all in perspective, that folk had come back from the First World War, land fit for heroes, etc., promised that they would get access, they would get a proper land reform deal. And when it became apparent that it just wasn't really going to happen, they boarded these boats like the Metagamma and just left this country. So here we are again. So anyway, but still, the play will be fabulous. I'm just saying, I've been watching there's a new series on BBC Scotland called The Ridge, which is pretty feisty. I think it's Douglas McKinnon who's the director, who's from Sky originally, but it's a co-thingamabob with New Zealand. Most of it's set in New Zealand, actually, which is, again, quite diverting to have a strong Scottish lassie kind of character on her own, essentially, in New Zealand. So that's quite something, if anybody is, for those of you who still will partake of BBC products. And actually, that was Scottish Screen that backed that, as well as, quite a few other things like Department Q. So I know they get pelters for some stuff, but those Scottish Screen investments have proved to be pretty useful lately. And this is my friend Sarah Sheridan. There's moments where I've been listening to a book of hers, The Ice Maiden, on audiobooks. My God, there's times when you sort of think, okay, I'm pretty in awe of her talents as a writer anyway. She did The Fair Botanist, which is the one that probably drew her to most people's attentions. And fabulous imagination, meticulous historical research and all the rest of it. But she is a woman. She was talking about Edinburgh and Glasgow. She does and has lived there. And, that is to some degree accessible. This book is set on a boat heading towards Antarctica and then moves into a fairly surreal bit halfway through where the main character becomes a spirit and basically hanging over what then turns out to be the ill-fated Scott expedition to the South Pole. I'm speechless with admiration for how vivid all of that is, considering that, to my knowledge, Sarah has not been a stowaway on a boat to the Antarctic in around 1910. So it's just a brilliant, brilliant book. So, yeah, if you're into this kind of stuff and you've read one of Sarah's books and think, oh, okay, what other ones? Read that one. It is a total winner.
Sounds good. Right. Well, just to say that I am off now to try a new bit of kit for processing. I do actually spend quite a lot of time processing the audio before it goes out, but obviously it's a back and forth, and one of us has had proper BBC education and is very good with their mic technique, and I get to take big rests while you speak and then come booming back in again. And because we don't have a audio level monitor here, it can sometimes take me a few moments to stop booming and get back on the straight and narrow.
You just are a boomer, right?
I'm a boomer. Come from a long line of boomers. My father is extremely boomery, and I'm very good at the public speaking for my booming qualities. So anyway, this new bit will hopefully make me less boomy and will put us up and doing diligently. We could do with a few more subscribers if you'd like to support the pod, and a big thanks to everybody who is a chum and a pal of the pod. If you'd like to contribute to help continue the podcast, you can do that at leslieriddick.com/podcast. And if we could get a few extra subscribers this week, we might be able to get a subscription to this fabulous bit of kit, which
Fraser.
levels us and gets us sorted out, and we'll get fewer Facebook
we'll
comments.
Get the bit of kit. We'll get the bit of kit anyway. Honestly, if folk are able to support, it's great. If they aren't, great. It's all cool.
It makes all the difference. I'll put the link up to the Ridge and to the Metagamma, which there are still a few tickets left for the Friday and some for the Saturday, and I'll get the Sheridan link for you as well. And next week we'll definitely cover the land reform and whatever on earth is going on with the council tax announcements once we'd have a proper time to chew over what's happened. And we'll also get the Craig Murray Salvo stuff out to you as soon as we can. And on that note, we will see you next week, chums.